I'm going to read from Tina Achebe's book. The book is called There Was a Country, and it says, it is important to point out that most Nigerians were against the war and abhorred the senseless violence that ensued as a result of the conflict. Before I continue, let me remind us that Tina Achebe was a propagandist for Biafra. He worked in Radio Biafra. He was part of the Directorate of Propaganda, and was also an ambassador for Biafra. That said, let's continue. It says, Gowon's wartime cabinet, it should also be remembered, was full of intellectuals like Obafemi Awolowo and Anthony Naoro, and super permanent secretaries like Alison Akene Aida, among others, who came up with a boatload of infamous and regrettable policies. A statement, by the way, there's no regrettable policy that Papa was part of. All his policies were yes and amen. They were good. Okay, as far as this period was concerned. Let's continue. Then it says, a statement credited to Chief Obafemi Awolowo and echoed by his cohorts is the most callous and unfortunate. Again, nothing callous about it, but let me read it so that you can judge for yourself. And this is what Awolowo was purportedly to have said. All is fair in war, and starvation is one of the weapons of war. I don't see why we should feed our enemies fat in order for them to fight harder. I just want to ask anybody in the comment section, if you think it's a problem, if you think it's not a problem, don't say anything. For the next 30 seconds, if you think there's a problem with that statement, please just write in the comment section. I'll bring you up, I promise. I'll read that statement again. All is fair in war, and starvation is one of the weapons of war. I don't see why we should feed our enemies fat in order for them to fight harder. If you think it's a problem, please just say it in the comment section. I'd like to bring you up. I'd like to hear your thoughts. Okay, nobody thinks it's a problem. Thank you. I think we are very wise people here, because there's absolutely no problem with that statement. None. And when you read that, you discover that it wasn't talking about people. It was talking about those who were fighting. But why would he say this? Let's go to his own interview. So this interview was granted in 1983. Okay, it was in Abeokuta. And so if you look through history, even during World War II, starvation was used as a weapon, right? The truth is, it's a weapon that's always been used all over the world. But even the way Papa talked about it, he wasn't using it as a weapon against the people. To start with, who in the world asks their enemies to feed them during a war? That's the first question for any sane person to think about. So if you're sane, especially those people that are always insulting me, in your sanity, please ask yourself that question, because you probably have moments of sanity from time to time. Where in the world does a person ask his enemy to feed him in order to fight that enemy? Unless you're taking advice from a madman. You know that makes no sense. Number two, was this man against the people, or was it against the soldiers? He said, I don't see why we should feed our enemies fat in order for them to fight harder. Who could fight harder? Soldiers, not the people. So that's the first thing. Now let's listen to Papa himself as he defends himself, and then we will now defend him with more sources. So he says here, by the way, if you have been listening to me for more than 1 or 2 days, you know that when I say Papa, I'm talking about Awolowo. So he says, above all, the ending of the war itself that I'm accused of is starving the Igbos. I did nothing of the sort. You know, shortly after the liberation of these places, Calabar, Enugu, and Port Harcourt, I decided to pay a visit. There are certain things which I knew, which you don't know, which I don't want to say here now. When I write my reminiscences in the future, I will do so. Some of the soldiers were not truthful with us. They didn't tell us correct stories. But when I went, what did I see? I saw the Kwashiorkor victims. If you see a Kwashiorkor victim, you'll never like war to be waged. Terrible sight in Enugu, in Port Harcourt, not many in Calabar, but mainly in Enugu and Port Harcourt. Then I inquired what happened to the food we were sending to the civilians. what happened to the food who were the we? The federal government. In other words, even during the war, the federal government was sending food to the people through Red Cross and Caritas. By the way, we're going to read the report from Red Cross 1968 today. So that way we can close this session. So we read from their own side to understand what happened and what Ojukwu did. So it may not be like, say, is it not just Papa? Is that who just talking? It's just, oh, you will lie? You can lie. Okay. Oh, you didn't lie. But we'll read the other stuff. So the point is, he asked, what happened to the food we have been sending? Why are these people emaciated? Why are the, like I've said several times, I don't banter with death or with suffering, right? I don't banter with, oh, see their head, see their stomach. No, it's a gory sight. I wasn't there, I've seen pictures, and that picture is even traumatizing. But like I always say, beyond the images you are seeing, don't fall for Ojukwu's ploy. And Ojukwu's idea really was to push those pictures in front of people's faces, and then that's all they saw. If there's time today, I'm going to get to what Majiparam said after she visited Nigeria, because she used to believe Ojukwu's pictures until she saw what really happened. We're going to get to that today, hopefully. So Papa said, he said, but when I went, what did I see? I saw the Kwashiorkor victims. If you see a Kwashiorkor victim, you never liked war to be waged. Terrible sight in Enugu, in Port Harcourt, not many in Calabar, but mainly in Enugu and Port Harcourt. Then I inquired what happened to the food we were sending to the civilians. We were sending food through the Red Cross and Caritas to them. But what happened was that the vehicles carrying the food were always ambushed by the rebel soldiers. That's what I discovered. And the food would then be taken to the soldiers to feed them. So they were able to continue to fight. And I said that was a very dangerous policy. We didn't intend the food for soldiers. But who will go behind the line to stop the soldiers from ambushing the vehicles that were carrying the food? And as long as soldiers were fed, the war will continue. And who will continue to suffer? And those who didn't go to the place to see things as I did, you remember that all the big guns, all the soldiers in the Biafran army looked all well fed after the war. It is only the mass of the people that suffered Kwashiorkor. You will not hear of a single lawyer, a single doctor, a single architect who suffered from Kwashiorkor. None of their children either. So they waylaid the foods, they ambushed the vehicles, and took the foods to their children and to their collaborators, and to their and the children of the masses were suffering. So I decided to stop sending the food there. In the process, the civilians would suffer, but the soldiers will suffer most. When you read Achebe's book, please, I beg you in the name of God, find real books around you before you read his non-fiction. If you're reading his fiction, you can read his shaping and fiction. But if it's non-fiction, like two that I've always mentioned, that The Trouble with Nigeria and There Was a Country. When you're reading those books, please find good, sensible books. Back then was to create this propaganda to make people either reject the food or not even know that the food was coming in the first place. What do I mean by that? So, for instance, they will take the food to the soldiers, and I think it was yesterday I played a video of the soldiers as they were surrendering. You find on YouTube when Philip Effiong surrendered to Gowon. This was 1970. You don't see anybody emaciated. You don't see anybody suffering like no food. Everybody was looking fine. You didn't even know they were coming from the war front. They were good. In other words, the people were the ones who suffered. The doctors, lawyers, architects, all those people, soldiers, especially the officers, everybody was fine. So what it means basically was that the food that was being sent to them was being hijacked by Ojukwu for his own men. My question is this: why didn't Ojukwu plan for food for his men, since he wanted to fight this war so badly? And why is Nigeria and why is Awolowo being blamed for the fact that his people could not feed or his soldiers did not have food? Then number 3, somebody wrote something in the comment section on YouTube, which is very valid. It says, they are not even afraid of poison. See, that thing you said, they are not afraid of poison, was a strategy they now used. What they said was that the food was poisoned. I read it here the other day. The man who led that charge was Okonkon Ndem. on Radio Biafra, said that the Nigerian government was sending poison food, so the people would reject it, and then they were eating it. So those working in radio, they were well fed. Everybody was well fed, but the people. Many of the young people, or generally, many of the people that get very angry about the war, and again, it was a terrible thing, right? The death, unfortunate, and I would say needless. But you see, your parents only suffered hunger because they were not part of the elite. That's the truth. If your parents were not very, or your grandparents, they were not well educated, they didn't really go to school, they were not part of the cream of society, those ones, they were okay. As a matter of fact, they were having snacks. Kids were having toys. So there is no way Nigeria is to be blamed, or Papa should be blamed for your predicament, although I empathize with you, but I cannot take the blame of your leaders. Or at least Papa should not take the blame of your leaders. 1 second, I want to read the letter and then we'll move on from here to other things. Right? So why is this letter important? Because it was written by a person that was representing the Eastern region at the time. The man's name is Robert Ghostin, and who was the public relations officer or public relations representative of Biafra in the United States. This open letter of resignation to Ojukwu was published in the Morning Post of Lagos, 17th August 1968. As your public relations representative in the United States, it is my distasteful duty to tender my resignation based on the following points. In November of 1967, when we met in Umuahia, you and your cabinet were very impressive. You told me of the woes of your little republic, that thousands of people were dying, and more were prepared to die for freedom's sake. You and your cabinet told me you believed what opinion you would help your cause if you could get your story across. You expressed the opinion that very few, if any, people in the United States knew of the plight of the Biafrans. You asked me to tell the world that Britain had teamed up with Russia in a conspiracy with the federal government of Nigeria to murder every Igbo in Biafra. You suggested I use my talents to induce the press to write about the Biafran side of the war, as at that time all news came out of Lagos. You will recall I did not take the assignment that day, but stayed on several days before deciding to take that job. At that time, I stated to you and your cabinet that I was taking to win the peace, not the war. I immediately arranged the first World Press Conference in Biafra, inviting the US press as well as journalists and television people from England, France, Switzerland, Africa, and other parts of the globe. This was the first news breakthrough. I arranged regular trips into Biafra for the world press, helped set up stringers and so on, so that your statements and the statements of your cabinet would be heard. At that time, I was absolutely positive you were right and your cause was a just one in the best interest of the free world and your countrymen. Finally, the Republic of Biafra was recognized first by Tanzania, then quickly followed by Gabon, the Ivory Coast, and Zambia. Our public relations work was paying off. World opinion was starting to side with us. Peace talks were arranged at Kampala. I thought, now this is where it gets crazy. Everything before now, nice. Now it gets terrible. Peace talks were arranged at Kampala. I thought that if anyone walked away from the table, it would be the federal government. But no, to my dismay, it was Biafra that left the conference. After all the fighting and killing, I knew that peace would not come easy, but I could not understand leaving the peace conference until the last point was negotiated and the avenue explored. Then urgent telex messages were received from Biafra telling of tens of thousands of people starving in the refugee camps, the villages, the bush country, stating if something weren't done in the next few months, over 1 million women, children, and aged would be starved to death. I immediately contacted the press, urgently petitioned the State Department for action on their part. Food, medicine, and milk were sent to the only available port open for immediate shipment to Biafra via land routes through federal and Biafra territory, under the auspices of world organizations such as the International Red Cross, among others. Then came the incredible answer from Biafra. that land corridors could not be acceptable until there was a complete ceasefire, and that an airlift was the only solution to feeding the starving. You see why I spent time reading the UK House of Commons debate about this same issue. And the issue, of course, was that these people were starving. Food was being made available, but Ojukwu kept saying that they would not allow food to be taken in through land corridors. The reason I read that again and again was just to tell you that whatever Robert Gosling is saying is what folks in the House of Commons are also affirming or confirming. All right. So this idea of land corridor is here. I'm going to read something about the same thing from the report from Red Cross. So it says, then came the incredible answer from Biafra that land corridors could not be acceptable until there was a complete ceasefire, and that an airlift was the only solution to feeding the starving. You then appeared before the various heads of state and representatives of the OAU at Niamey in Niger. I fully expected you to at least accept the word help that was offered your starving throngs. However, you delayed, hoping to use these unfortunates with world sympathy on their side as a tool to further your ambition to achieve war concessions at the upcoming peace talks in Addis Ababa. Thus, innocent victims continue to perish needlessly of starvation, the most agonizing death that can befall any living creature. This was incredible to me. I am now convinced that I have been used by you. Said, I am now convinced that I have been used by you and your cabinet to help in military adventures of your origin, using your starving hordes as hostages to negotiate a victory. If at some later date, following the issuance of this letter, you do concede to allow a mercy land corridor, would you expect me to agree to espouse before the world press the incredible delay of your decision? What explanation could I honestly give for the needless prolongation of this horror? I pray this communication may in some small way influence you to move affirmatively, allowing the mercy land corridor to be born. It is inconceivable to me that you would stop the feeding of thousands of your countrymen under auspices of world organizations such as the International Red Cross, World Council of Churches, and many more, via a land corridor, which is the only practical way to bring in food to help at this time. It is inconceivable to me that men of good faith would try to twist world opinion in such a manner as to deceive people into believing that the starvation and hunger that is consuming Biafra is a plot of Biafra, Nigeria, is a plot of Britain, Nigeria, and others to commit genocide. I cannot in all conscience serve you any longer, nor can I be a party to suppressing the fact that your starving thousands have the food, medicine, and milk available to them. It can and is ready to be delivered through international organizations to you. Only your constant refusal has stopped its delivery. Why did the people suffer? Because Ojukwu did not want them to eat. That's the simple answer. Ojukwu didn't want them fed. Why? He needed content. When you hear content is king, it didn't start with Facebook. It didn't start with Instagram or TikTok or IG or YouTube. Ojukwu needed the content. So he says, I am this date tendering my resignation and I'm returning to Mr. Collins Obi of the African Continental Bank all the fees you have given me. Letter of credit number 3354, $400,000. This man was given this. Ojukwu paid him $400,000 for his work. I have sent your representatives in New York a bond in the amount of £800,000 that I was holding in your behalf. I have also these dates sent the bond of £200,000 issued by the Central Bank of Nigeria back to them for disposal. If Awolowo hates people this much, like they want you to believe. Thank you for the gift. If Awolowo hates people as much as they want you to believe, why would he approve, or himself and the president approve, or head of state at the time go on? Why would both of them approve £200,000 to be issued by Central Bank of Nigeria to the East? Why do they have a bond of £200,000 sent to Goldstein, who was a representative of Biafra? But they hate the Igbos. How? Kò gbára wọn, kò jọra wọn. Final paragraph before we go to something else. It says here, I am now convinced that one Nigeria is the only solution to peace. I also call upon you, Mr. Ojukwu, to allow your starving people to be fed. Their well-being is of deep concern to me, as well as other right-thinking people of the world. Your acting in the utmost haste in this matter is, in my opinion, the first step toward any lasting peace in your country. Ojukwu didn't want them to eat because he was taking pictures. The pictures were sent to newspapers and magazines all across the world. People saw those images and they were gripped and they wanted to do something. And because he was trying to work on people's emotions, he did not allow his own people to eat. Imagine somebody, an outsider, an American, begging you to allow your people to be fed. But no, it's how that's your problem. I can't believe I can't find this thing. How to find it? This allegation is also on scrutiny. Okay, to imply that church leaders, missionaries, and relief workers on the spot are liars. Because say these people, what I'm trying to say is that in the midst of the war, the Biafran propagandists were saying that it was absurd for people to say that the food was ending up with them and not with the people, because after all, the Red Cross guys were there. But in actual fact, what they were trying to do was, and I think one thing I can respect these guys for is their understanding of how to use the media to skew public opinion. So they'll say things like, oh, the Red Cross was here all along, they were here. If the food was being taken, they would not have done anything. They would have said something, right? And then they'll say, oh, you are saying that the churches are giving us guns. But are you saying that the churches are lying, that they are not giving guns? But in truth, not only was the World Council of Churches giving them guns, they were also giving them money and depositing it in bank accounts all across the world, Swiss banks, French banks, just to ensure that they were, essentially funding the war. And why is that? You see, at the beginning of the war, Ojukwu did something very interesting. They reached out to the Catholic bishop or archbishop, I think it was of one of those cities, was it Onitsha or Enugu, and spoke to them that they wanted Biafra to be a Christian nation, essentially a Catholic nation. And that was one of the things that convinced the Roman Catholic Church to support the war. We were talking about it some days ago. I'm just trying to tell you that they saw it as an extension of the church. When I say the church, I'm not talking about the body of Christ. I'm saying the church as an extension of Roman Catholic Church. Because if they help them, then, they are helping brothers in Christ. All this warp thing was going on while everybody was blaming everybody else. I think I should read one or two more things and then we'll just call it a day. It's been a long day, actually. Let me read from Chinua Achebe. It's not like it's the truth, but it helps us to understand what he thinks. So he says here, Ojukwu dispatched several of his ambassadors to world capitals, hoping to build on the momentum from his broadcast. His envoys received little new support or pledges. Frustrated by the obstacles he found in coaxing a more pro-Biafra policy from the United States, Sir Louis Mbanefo famously rebuked the Americans, saying, "We are especially resentful of the ambivalent pretenses the United States makes, that it is trying to help us. If we are condemned to die, all right, we will die. But blackmail." Let's go on. Meanwhile, on the other side of the planet, Nigeria and Biafran envoys were meeting with His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia to sort out the modality of air and land transport for relief supplies. The diplomatic battles had reached a fever pitch by the middle of 1968. Gowon, under immense international pressure and bristling from the whirlwind of publicity about Biafra, decided to open up land routes for a supervised transport of relief. To the consternation of Gowon, Ojukwu opted out of land routes in favor of increased airlift of food from Sao Tome by international relief agencies. Ojukwu, like many Biafrans, was concerned about the prospect that Nigerians will poison the food supplies. We're saying this, Chino Achebe. Why would they repeat this? Because he worked in Radio Biafra. That was a statement Radio Biafra made again and again. This is why I tell you that this book is poison. Achebe kept on with the propaganda even to his old age, even on his deathbed. Oh, they had clinical. Oh, they did this. You now begin to wonder, how would they poison this thing when it's not like they're in the hands of Nigerian officers? It's like the officers will just poison it and deliver it. The food was never delivered from Nigeria to them. It was delivered from Nigeria through the international agencies to Biafra. So I'm wondering, maybe those ones would have been looking at Nigeria destroying everything. But I think, let me bring people up, but let me just round up by saying this. There's something else I wanted to say, but I'll say it on Monday because I'm a bit tired now. It's past 6. Just to round up, from everything we've seen here, every document, the documents confirm when you put everything together that yes, there was blockade by the federal government. Excuse me. And yes, there was a time that food wasn't going into Biafra. But it was made clear that the reason was because the food originally was being diverted to feed soldiers and civilians who were needed or who were related or who were close to the Biafran government. We also discovered that whether it was in the House of Commons in the UK, right, or Red Cross Society, they all talked about how difficult it was to get food into Biafra. First, because of the blockade, but even when Nigeria removed the restrictions, Biafra still had several demands. And then, of course, more important, I think one of the most important things about this would be the document or the letter by Robert Goldstein saying that Ojukwu was actually denying his people from being fed. So that means that the starvation itself was not real. It was just like a film. The people were dying, that was real, but the idea that they were being starved by Awo or by Nigeria is a lie. Apparently, was all Ojukwu's handiwork, and he did that because he wanted to skew public opinion, and he succeeded for a while, until some of them began to travel down to Nigeria, e.g. Marjorie Parham, who was very much in support of Ojukwu and Biafra. Was when she traveled down that she saw the reality of what was happening and then decided to change her mind and called on Biafrans or the Igbo people to, essentially move on.